Tonight we will explore something most would prefer to forget: the moments when our actions, born from greed, deception, or cruelty, return to teach us their hardest lessons. These are the stories our ancestors whispered by firelight, not to frighten, but to warn, not to judge, but to illuminate the invisible threads that connect every deed to its consequence. There is nothing you need to do tonight, nothing to fix, no one you need to become. These teachings will find you in your dreams, in the quiet spaces between sleep and waking. If this path of wisdom calls to you, I invite you to subscribe and join us each night as we explore the deepest truths through the gentlest stories. We call this teaching karma, the Sanskrit word meaning action, but also the law that every action creates a consequence, like ripples spreading across still water. Tonight we will see how the harm we cause others becomes the suffering we ourselves must face, and how the seeds we plant in darkness always grow toward light, revealing everything we thought we had hidden. Let us begin this journey together. Take a gentle breath now. Feel the air moving softly through your body. Notice how your breathing requires no effort, no planning. Each breath comes and goes like a wave, carrying you deeper into rest. There is nothing you need to understand, nothing you need to remember. Simply let these stories wash over you like water, smooth and warm. Let us explore a story that begins in a mountain village, where mist clung to stone houses each dawn, and where a leader learned that stealing from safety is the same as murder by your own hands. In a village nestled between two peaks, where morning mist rose from the valley like the breath of sleeping giants, there lived a man named Aaron, who had been chosen to lead because he spoke well and promised much. The village sat on one side of a deep gorge, while their fields and market lay on the other side. For generations, people had climbed down the rocky walls and up the other side, a journey that took half a day and claimed lives when rains made the rocks slippery. Aaron had convinced the village council to build a rope bridge. He stood in the meeting hall, his voice carrying to every corner as he painted pictures with words. "Imagine," he said, "stepping from our doorsteps and walking straight across to the fields. Imagine the old ones visiting the market without fear. Imagine the children playing safely on both sides." The villagers had saved for 3 years. Each family contributed what they could: silver coins worn smooth by countless hands, copper vessels passed down through generations, even precious stones that had been kept for emergencies. They trusted Aaron to purchase the strongest rope from the city, rope thick as a man's arm and tested to hold the weight of loaded carts. Aaron made the journey to the city with a cart full of the village's wealth. But when he saw the price of the strong rope, when he held the heavy silver in his hands and imagined what it could buy for himself, something shifted in his chest. He told himself the thinner rope would be sufficient. He told himself the difference was wasteful luxury. He told himself the village would never know. He bought rope half as thick as what he had promised, keeping the difference for himself. The rope looked substantial enough, he reasoned. Who would measure it? Who would test it? Who would ever know? The bridge took 2 months to build. Aaron supervised the work, watching men risk their lives to anchor the ropes to stone posts on each side of the gorge. The bridge swayed in mountain winds, but seemed solid. Aaron was the first to cross, walking carefully from plank to plank, while the village watched and cheered. Their leader had delivered what he promised. For 6 months, the bridge served well. Farmers crossed with their grain, families visited relatives, children played games that spanned both sides of the gorge. Aaron felt proud when people praised his leadership. He had built something lasting, something that made life better. The extra silver he had kept seemed like a reasonable reward for his management. But rope weakens over time, especially thin rope bearing weight it was never meant to carry. Each crossing, each load of grain, each dance of wind stretched the fibers beyond their limits. The thicker rope would have held for decades. The thinner rope had months before it would fail. On a morning when autumn clouds gathered heavy with coming rain, 5 travelers approached the village seeking passage across the gorge. Among them was Aaron's younger brother Mohan, returning from a pilgrimage with his wife and young son. They had been away for a year, visiting holy sites in distant mountains, and Aaron had not seen them since before the bridge was built. Arun embraced his brother at the bridge's edge. Mohan marveled at the construction, running his hands along the rope railings. "You've done something wonderful here, brother," he said. "This will serve our people for generations." The travelers started across together, their footsteps creating a gentle rhythm on the wooden planks. Aaron watched from his side, waving to his nephew who skipped ahead of the adults, delighted by the view into the deep gorge below. The boy called back to his uncle, his voice clear in the mountain air. It was then that the main support rope snapped, not all at once, but strand by strand, the fibers giving way with sounds like branches breaking. The bridge tilted sharply. The travelers clutched at the railings, but those ropes were weakening too. Aaron ran toward the bridge, shouting warnings, but there was nothing anyone could do. The bridge folded in the middle like a closing book, spilling its human cargo into the gorge. The sound of the collapse echoed off the canyon walls, wood splintering, rope whipping through air, and then the terrible silence that follows when something irreversible has happened. Aaron lay on his stomach at the gorge's edge, staring down into the depths where everything he loved had disappeared. His brother's voice had been cut short mid-sentence. His nephew's laughter had stopped forever. 3 other families had lost members in that moment when thin rope proved too thin. The village gathered at the broken bridge. They stared at the frayed rope ends, and those who knew rope, the fishermen, the sailors, the craftsmen, began to understand what they were seeing. The rope was half the thickness it should have been. The weave was loose. The quality was poor. "This is not the rope we paid for," said Gopi, an old fisherman whose hands knew good rope from bad. He held up one of the snapped ends, showing how the inner strands had rotted from moisture. "Strong rope doesn't fail like this. Strong rope would have held." Others examined the remaining pieces. A carpenter found knots that had been hidden under wrapping, places where inferior rope had been joined to look like continuous length. A weaver recognized the pattern of cheap mountain ropes sold in the city's lower markets. They looked at Aaron, who stood silent at the gorge's edge, his face empty of everything but loss. They began to calculate. They remembered what they had contributed, what strong rope should have cost, what was left unaccounted for. The village council met that evening in the same hall where Aaron had painted his vision of a safe bridge. Now they asked different questions. Where was the rope they had paid for? Where was the excess silver? What had Aaron done with their trust? Under questioning, the truth emerged like water from a cracked jar. Aaron admitted to buying cheaper rope. He showed them where he had hidden the silver he had not spent. He tried to explain that he had thought the thinner rope would be sufficient, that he had not meant for anyone to be hurt. But the village had mathematics now, not just grief. They calculated that strong rope would have cost exactly what they had raised. They saw that every coin Aaron had kept was a coin not spent on their safety. They understood that he had traded their lives for silver, and that his own brother had paid the price. That night, as Arun sat alone in his house with the stolen silver heavy in his hands, an old monk appeared at his door. The monk had been traveling toward the bridge when he heard the collapse, had seen the rescue attempts, had listened to the village's discoveries. "You built a bridge of greed," the monk said gently, "that collapsed under the weight of consequence." Aaron looked up from the silver coins scattered across his table. "I never meant for anyone to die," he said. "I thought the rope would hold." "Did you think it or did you hope it?" the monk asked. "Did you test it or did you simply pray it would be enough?" Arun was quiet for a long moment. "I hoped," he finally said. "I saw the silver, and I hoped the cheaper rope would work." "Hope built on greed is not hope," the monk observed. "It is a wish that others will pay the price of your choices." The monk sat beside Aaron at the table where the stolen silver caught lamplight. "Tell me about your brother," he said. "Mohan was the better man," Aaron said, his voice breaking. "He would have bought the strong rope. He would have spent every coin on safety. He would never have risked others for his own gain. And now? Now he is dead because I am not the man he was." The monk nodded slowly. "Karma is not punishment from the gods," he said. "It is the teaching that actions carry their truth forward until that truth is revealed. You stole from the bridge, and the bridge stole from you. You weakened what should protect, and weakness destroyed what you loved most." Aaron gathered the silver coins in his hands, feeling their weight differently now. "Can I undo this? Can I bring them back?" "The dead cannot return," the monk said. "But understanding can be born from even the deepest harm. The question now is what you will build with that understanding." They sat in silence as the lamp burned lower, two men surrounded by the silver that had bought so much loss. Outside, the wind moved through the mountains, carrying the sound of a village learning to live with an unbridged gorge and the knowledge that their trust had been betrayed by the very hand they had chosen to protect them. This story shows us how corruption of public trust becomes the murder of those we love most. Aaron discovered that when we steal from safety, we kill with our own hands, even though we never raise a weapon. Buddhism teaches that karma connects every action to its consequence through chains we cannot see, until they tighten around what matters most to us. When we choose personal gain over others' welfare, we plant seeds that grow into the destruction of our own joy. Let us pause here and breathe. Feel the steady rhythm of your heart, the gentle expansion and contraction of your chest. Notice how your body knows how to breathe without your guidance, how rest comes naturally when you allow it. There is nothing you need to figure out, nothing you need to solve. Simply rest here in this moment, supported and safe. Now let us explore another story, one that takes us to the spice markets, where gold and saffron commanded princely sums, and where a merchant learned that the fraud we introduce to the world inevitably returns to corrupt our own most sacred moments. In a city where narrow streets wound between tall houses and the air carried the scent of 100 spices, there lived a woman named Deepa, whose shop occupied a corner where 3 market alleys met. Her wooden shelves held clay jars filled with cardamom and cinnamon, turmeric and cloves, and behind the counter in a locked chest, the most precious spice of all, saffron. True saffron came from far mountain valleys where purple crocuses bloomed for just 2 weeks each autumn. Each flower yielded only 3 red stigmas, and it took hundreds of flowers to produce even a small amount of the precious spice. Saffron commanded prices higher than silver, and Deepa's customers saved for months to purchase even a pinch for their most important dishes. Deepa had built her reputation on quality. Customers traveled from distant neighborhoods to buy her spices because they trusted her word. When she said the saffron was pure, families spent their savings knowing they would receive what they paid for. For years, this trust had served everyone well. But one season, when the saffron harvest failed and prices rose beyond what even wealthy customers could afford, Deepa faced a choice that would change everything. She had discovered that dried marigold stamens, when carefully prepared, looked remarkably similar to saffron. The color was close, the texture comparable, and customers who had never handled pure saffron might not notice the difference until too late. She told herself it would be temporary, just until the saffron harvest improved. She told herself she was helping customers by keeping prices affordable. She told herself that most people couldn't tell the difference anyway, so what harm could it do? Deepa began mixing true saffron with dried marigold stamens, first in small amounts, then in greater proportions, as she saw how easy the deception proved. Eventually, she was selling pure marigold stamens as saffron, charging the full price while her costs dropped to almost nothing. Her profits soared, and customers continued to praise her shop's quality. For 2 years, the fraud continued. Deepa's business thrived as she undercut other spice merchants who couldn't match her prices. She expanded her shop, hired assistants, and became known as the most prosperous spice dealer in the quarter. She justified the deception by her success. Surely if it were truly wrong, she reasoned, it wouldn't work so well. Then Deepa's daughter Kavitha announced her engagement to a young man from a respected family. The wedding would be a grand affair, requiring the finest ingredients for the ceremonial foods. The bride's family was expected to provide saffron for the sacred rice pudding that would be blessed by the priests and shared by all the wedding guests. This pudding was more than food. It was a sacrament, and its purity was essential for the ritual's validity. Deepa could not use her own false saffron for her daughter's wedding. The priests would surely detect the fraud, the ceremony would be invalidated, and her daughter's reputation would be ruined. She needed genuine saffron, and she needed it in quantities larger than her small emergency reserve. She approached Ramesh, a spice merchant from the next district who was known for carrying the finest saffron. His prices were higher than what she charged her own customers, but she had no choice. This was her daughter's wedding, and nothing could go wrong. Ramesh welcomed her warmly, praising her shop's reputation and expressing honor at serving such a successful colleague. He showed her his finest saffron, dark red threads in a silk-lined box. The aroma was complex and intoxicating, the color rich and deep. Deepa examined it carefully and agreed to purchase the amount she needed, paying prices that made her wince. The wedding day arrived with all its complexity and joy. Kavitha looked radiant in her silk sari, and the groom's family had prepared their traditional dishes with care. The sacred rice pudding was made with great ceremony, the precious saffron stirred in while priests chanted blessings. But when the pudding was served, something was wrong. The color was pale, the aroma weak, the flavor flat and unremarkable. The head priest, an elderly man whose palate had been trained on decades of ceremonial foods, tasted the pudding and frowned. "This saffron is not pure," he announced to the assembled families. "The blessing cannot be complete with impure ingredients." The shame fell on Deepa's family like a weight. The groom's relatives whispered among themselves. The ceremony had to be modified, the traditional pudding set aside, alternative offerings hastily prepared. Kavitha's face burned with embarrassment as explanations were demanded and solutions sought. Later, after the crisis had been managed and the wedding somehow completed despite the humiliation, Deepa confronted Ramesh privately. She accused him of selling her false saffron, of ruining her daughter's wedding, of betraying the trust between merchants. Ramesh looked at her with genuine confusion. "Sister," he said, "I sold you exactly what you sell to others. I bought that saffron from a merchant who guaranteed its quality, just as you guarantee yours. If there was fraud, it began somewhere else in the chain." Deepa stared at him, understanding beginning to dawn like a cold sunrise. "You mean you don't know what you sold me?" "I trusted my supplier as your customers trust you," Ramesh replied. "We all depend on each other's honesty. When one link in the chain breaks, we all suffer the consequences." That evening, as the wedding guests departed and the decorations were put away, Deepa sat in her spice shop surrounded by jars of false saffron. An old priest who had known her family for generations came to speak with her privately. "The market you corrupted," he said gently, "has corrupted your own sacred moments." Deepa looked up from the jar of marigold stamens in her hands. "How did you know?" "A priest learns to taste truth," he replied. "Your saffron has been false for 2 years, but we said nothing because people seemed satisfied with the illusion. Today, when truth mattered most to you, the same illusion appeared in your bowl." "But I needed real saffron for the wedding," Deepa protested. "I would never use false saffron for something so important." "Yet you sold false saffron to other families for their important moments," the priest observed. "Other weddings, other ceremonies, other celebrations you deemed less worthy of truth than your own." Deepa set down the jar and looked around her shop, at the customer's trust betrayed in every container, at the prosperity built on deception, at the success that had poisoned the very market she depended on. "I created this," she whispered. "I taught the market that fraud was acceptable, and the market taught me the same lesson when I needed truth most." The priest nodded. "When we introduce poison into the stream, we cannot prevent it from flowing back to our own wells." They sat together in the aromatic shop as evening settled over the market streets, surrounded by the evidence of how the fraud we bring to others always finds its way back to corrupt our own most sacred needs. This story shows us how the deception we practice on others eventually practices itself on us. Deepa discovered that when we corrupt the marketplace with fraud, we create the very conditions that will defraud our own most important moments. Buddhism teaches that our actions ripple outward and return to us, carrying the same energy we sent into the world. When we choose deception for profit, we plant seeds that grow into the corruption of our own joy. Rest your breath now. Let your shoulders soften, your jaw release, your whole body settle deeper into comfort. Feel how each exhale carries away tension, how each inhale brings peace. You are held and supported, safe in this moment of rest. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do. Let us now visit a riverbank where a washerman learned that blaming others for damage we cause guarantees our own isolation, and where the violence of our methods always reveals itself in the destruction they create. By a river that curved like a silver ribbon through green fields, where morning light turned water to gold and evening shadows made it deep blue, there worked a man named Ramesh, whose job was to wash the village's clothes. His washing place occupied the best spot on the riverbank, where the current ran swift and clean, and flat stones provided perfect surfaces for beating dirt from fabric. Ramesh had inherited this work from his father, and his father's father before him. For generations, his family had served the village by making dirty clothes clean, by removing stains that seemed impossible to lift, by returning garments fresh and bright to families who depended on their service. But Ramesh had grown impatient with the slow, careful methods his father had taught him. The old way required patience, soaking clothes for the right amount of time, using the gentlest motions that would clean without damage. testing each fabric to understand its nature. This careful approach meant he could only wash a certain number of garments each day, which limited his earnings. Ramesh decided to speed the process. Instead of patient soaking, he began beating clothes violently against the river stones, using force to drive out dirt that gentleness would have coaxed away slowly. Instead of testing fabrics, he treated everything the same way: cotton and silk, thick work clothes and delicate ceremonial garments, all receiving the same harsh pounding against unforgiving stone. The method worked, in a sense. Clothes came clean faster, and Ramesh could process twice as many garments in a day. His income increased, and he felt clever for improving on his father's old-fashioned ways. He told himself that efficiency was a virtue, that results mattered more than methods. But within weeks, customers began returning with complaints. Fine cotton shirts had small tears that hadn't been there before. Silk scarves had pulled threads and rough spots. Wedding saris showed stress marks along their edges. Work clothes wore out faster than they should have, requiring replacement sooner than families had budgeted for. When customers brought these concerns to Ramesh, he dismissed them with practiced explanations. The cloth must have been poor quality to begin with, he said. Modern fabrics weren't made as well as in the old days. People were too demanding, too particular about minor flaws that didn't affect the garment's function. "You bought cheap cloth," he would tell them. "What do you expect? Good washing can only do so much with inferior materials." Some customers tried to explain that the same fabrics had lasted for years under his father's care, but Ramesh had an answer for this too. "My father was gentle with cloth because he didn't understand efficiency," he said. "I get clothes truly clean. If they can't handle proper cleaning, the fault is in the weaving, not my washing." For a time, his explanations seemed sufficient. Customers grumbled, but continued using his service because he was the only washerman in their part of the village, and finding alternatives would require traveling great distances. Ramesh felt vindicated by their continued patronage. If his methods were truly wrong, he reasoned, people would stop coming. But gradually, word spread through the village networks that connected households across neighborhoods. Women talking at the well, men chatting in tea shops, families visiting relatives in other areas. All began sharing stories about the washerman whose cleaning destroyed more than it restored. A merchant named Jagdish, who lived on the other side of the village, began offering washing services. Jagdish had learned the traditional methods from an elderly washerman in his own family, and he practiced the old ways of patience and care. His prices were the same as Ramesh's, but his treatment of fabric was gentle and thorough. At first, only a few adventurous customers tried Jagdish's service. But when they saw how their clothes returned undamaged, how colors stayed bright and fabric stayed strong, they began telling others. Word of mouth spread faster than Ramesh realized, carrying news of an alternative that actually preserved what it cleaned. Within a year, Ramesh's customer base had shrunk by half. Within 2 years, he was washing clothes only for people who lived too far away to easily reach Jagdish, or who hadn't yet heard about the alternative. His income fell even below what it had been in his father's time, and he found himself working the same long hours for far less money. Ramesh blamed the customers for their disloyalty. He blamed Jagdish for stealing his business with unfair competition. He blamed the village for not appreciating his efficient methods. He blamed everyone except himself for the violence he had introduced into his craft. One morning, as Ramesh sat by the river with only 3 garments to wash, the smallest load he had seen in months, his father's old friend Gopal approached the washing place. Gopal had been watching Ramesh's decline with the sadness of someone who remembered better times. "Your father would wash my best shirt with such care," Gopal said, sitting on a stone beside the younger man. He would test the fabric first, soak it just long enough, work the dirt out like he was coaxing a child to give up a secret. The shirt lasted 20 years and looked good until the day I gave it to my son. Ramesh continued beating a cotton tunic against the stone, not looking up. "My father wasted time," he said. "I get the same results faster." Gopal watched the violent motions, saw how the fabric stretched and stressed under the harsh treatment. "Do you?" he asked quietly. "Do you really get the same results?" "The clothes come clean," Ramesh insisted, beating harder. "And then what happens to them?" Ramesh finally stopped his work and looked at the old man. "What do you mean? What happens after they're clean? How long do they last? How often do families need to replace what you've washed?" Ramesh stared at the tunic in his hands, seeing for the first time the small tears his beating had created, the way the fabric had thinned where it struck stone repeatedly, the stress marks that would become larger holes with wear. "I blamed the cloth," he said slowly. "I said it was cheap, poorly made." "Was it?" Gopal asked. "Or was it ordinary cloth that needed ordinary care?" Ramesh looked around his empty washing place, at the stone stained with his violent work, at the river that had witnessed generations of gentle washing before his harsh methods changed everything. "I drove them away," he realized. "Not with bad results, but with good results that turned bad after people took their clothes home. They learned to fear what I would do to their next garment." Gopal nodded. "Your father used to say that washing clothes is like raising children. Force creates damage that shows up later, while patience creates strength that lasts a lifetime." That afternoon, as Ramesh sat alone by the river with his 3 garments, a traveling monk stopped to rest by the water. The monk watched Ramesh work, observing the careful violence of each motion, the way the young man's face showed frustration and blame. "You broke what was given to you," the monk said gently, "and called it weakness in others." Ramesh looked up from his work, startled by the stranger's words. "The cloth is weak," he said automatically. "Modern fabric can't handle proper cleaning." "Show me," the monk said, pointing to the tunic Ramesh was washing. "Show me the weakness in this cloth." Ramesh held up the garment, pointing out thin spots and small tears. "See? It's falling apart just from normal washing." The monk examined the damage closely. "This tearing follows the pattern of your stones," he observed. "These thin spots match where you strike hardest. This isn't cloth weakness. This is cloth broken by the method you use to clean it." Ramesh stared at the evidence in his own hands. "But I need to get clothes clean quickly," he said. "Time is money." "Is it?" the monk asked. "How much time do you spend washing now compared to a year ago? How much money do you earn now compared to then?" Ramesh calculated the painful truth. He was working the same hours for half the income, with customers who came reluctantly and left worried about what he might do to their next load of washing. "I destroyed my own livelihood," he whispered. "I blamed everyone else for what my own hands were doing." The monk nodded. "When we use violence to solve problems of patience, we create new problems that require more violence to manage. Eventually, we are left alone with our violent methods and no one willing to trust us with anything delicate." They sat by the river as the sun moved toward evening, 2 men surrounded by the consequences of choices that had seemed reasonable when they were made, but revealed their true nature only when it was too late to easily change course. This story shows us how violent methods always reveal themselves in the damage they create, and how blaming others for our own destructiveness guarantees isolation. Ramesh discovered that when we use force where patience is needed, we destroy the very thing we're trying to improve. Buddhism teaches that harsh means always produce harsh results, even when those results are delayed. When we choose aggression over gentleness, we plant seeds that grow into the destruction of trust and the loss of what we value most. Take a moment now to breathe deeply. Feel how your breath moves naturally without force or effort. Notice how your body knows exactly how to rest, how to release tension without struggle. Let your whole being soften like cloth soaking in warm water, gentle and gradual and complete. You are safe here, supported and cared for. Let us turn now to an orchard where mangoes hung heavy on ancient branches and where a farmer learned that hoarding rare gifts ensures they die with us rather than multiply for the benefit of all. In a region where red earth stretched between scattered villages and ancient trees provided shade for travelers, there lived a farmer named Sohan, whose land had been worked by his family for 7 generations. His orchards produced good fruit, mangoes and guavas, papayas and pomegranates that fed his family and provided surplus for the local markets. Among his many trees stood one mango tree that was different from all others. This tree, which his grandfather had planted as a seedling brought from a distant valley, produced fruit unlike any other mango in the region. The mangoes were large and perfectly sweet, with flesh that was golden as sunset and smooth as silk. But most remarkably, these mangoes had no seeds. For years, Sohan had enjoyed these exceptional fruits with his family, thinking them merely an interesting curiosity. The mangoes tasted wonderful, and the absence of seeds made them convenient to eat. But he hadn't considered the broader significance of what grew in his orchard. Then a traveling fruit merchant visited the local market and tasted one of Sohan's seedless mangoes. The merchant's eyes widened with surprise and excitement. "Where did you find this?" he asked urgently. "I have traveled through 7 states and never tasted anything like it." The merchant explained that seedless mangoes were extraordinarily rare, perhaps unique to this single tree. In the cities, wealthy families would pay enormous sums for such fruit. Hotels catering to foreign visitors would compete for the exclusive right to serve them. This was not just superior fruit. It was a miracle of nature that could command princely prices. Sohan began bringing his seedless mangoes to market, selling them for 10 times the price of ordinary fruit. Word spread quickly through trading networks about the farmer who grew seedless mangoes, and buyers began traveling from distant cities to purchase his entire crop. Within 2 seasons, the income from this single tree exceeded the profit from all his other crops combined. But with prosperity came a new concern. Other farmers began asking Sohan where they could obtain seedlings or grafts from his miracle tree. They offered to purchase cuttings, to pay for grafting rights, to enter into partnerships that would allow them to grow similar fruit on their own land. Sohan refused all such requests. This tree was his family's fortune, his unique advantage in the market. Why should he share what nature had given only to him? Why should he help competitors who would only reduce his prices and steal his customers? He told the inquiring farmers that the tree was too delicate for transplanting, that the seedless variety wouldn't grow in other soils, that the grafting process was too complex and risky. He invented technical explanations for why sharing was impossible, but the truth was simpler. He wanted to keep the treasure for himself. As demand grew, Sohan became increasingly protective of his secret. He built higher fences around the orchard, hired guards during fruiting season, and refused to let visitors near the special tree. He even stopped allowing his own extended family to know exactly which tree produced the valuable fruit, fearing they might steal cuttings to start their own groves. The tree continued to produce abundantly for several seasons. Sohan grew wealthy, expanded his house, and became known throughout the region as the man who controlled the rarest fruit in 7 states. He felt clever for protecting his advantage, justified in his secrecy by his success. But in the 5th year after the merchant's first visit, disaster struck the orchard. A new disease appeared, carried by insects that had never been seen in the region before. The disease attacked mango trees specifically, causing their leaves to yellow and their branches to die back progressively until the entire tree succumbed. One by one, Sohan's mango trees began showing symptoms. He consulted agricultural experts, applied every treatment they recommended, and spent enormous sums trying to save his orchard. But the disease was aggressive and his remedies ineffective. Within 6 months, he had lost half his mango trees, including many that had produced fruit for decades. The seedless mango tree held out longer than most, its unique genetics seeming to provide some resistance to the disease. For a time, Sohan hoped this special tree would survive when others failed. He lavished extra care on it, building barriers around its base, treating its soil with expensive compounds, even hiring a specialist to examine its health weekly. But genetics that create seedless fruit also create other vulnerabilities. The same mutations that eliminated seed production had weakened the tree's immune responses. When the disease finally took hold in the special tree, its progress was swift and irreversible. Within 3 weeks, the tree that had made Sohan wealthy was dead, its branches bare and its unique genetics lost forever. Sohan stood in his depleted orchard, staring at the dead trunk that had been his fortune. Around the region, other farmers who had lost their mango trees were replanting with disease-resistant varieties developed by agricultural research stations. These new varieties would fruit in 3 years and provide reliable harvests for generations. But Sohan had no such option for his seedless mangoes. The tree was gone, and with it, the genetic material that could have created an entire industry. Because he had shared nothing, nothing remained to rebuild from. A botanist who had heard about the unique tree came to examine what remained. She studied the dead trunk, took samples of the wood, and asked detailed questions about the fruit it had produced. This was probably a genetic mutation that occurs perhaps once in a million trees, she told Sohan sadly. If you had allowed us to study it, to take grafts and cuttings, we could have preserved the genetics and possibly improved upon them. We could have developed disease-resistant versions that would have survived what killed the parent tree. Sohan looked at the dead tree, understanding for the first time what his secrecy had cost. I thought I was protecting my advantage, he said. Your greed made you the last person to taste what could have fed generations, the botanist replied gently. Now that unique gift is extinct, lost forever, because one man couldn't bear to share abundance. She explained how plant genetics work, how diversity comes from sharing and crossbreeding, how isolation leads to vulnerability and eventual extinction. The seedless mango could have become the ancestor of a whole new category of fruit, benefiting millions of people and creating an industry that would have enriched many farmers. Instead, it died as it had lived in its final years, alone and unshared. That evening, as Sohan walked through his damaged orchard in the fading light, his neighbor Krishnan came to offer condolences for the loss of the trees. Krishnan had been one of the farmers who had asked for cuttings years earlier, and his request had been firmly refused. I'm sorry about your special tree, Krishnan said genuinely. That was a loss for all of us. Sohan looked at him in surprise. For all of you? But it was my tree, my profit. Your tree, Krishnan agreed, but its gift could have spread through all our orchards. My children's children might have grown up with seedless mangoes in their own gardens. the whole region might have become famous for this fruit instead of just one farm. Sohan realized that Krishnan felt genuine grief for the lost tree, not because of money he might have made, but because of beauty and abundance that would never exist now. His neighbor mourned not a lost opportunity for competition, but a lost chance for shared prosperity. "I was afraid you would take away my advantage," Sohan admitted. "Brother," Krishnan said softly, "when a gift is rare enough, sharing it doesn't divide it, it multiplies it. You could have been the father of a new kind of fruit instead of just its only seller." They stood together among the dead and dying trees as darkness settled over the orchard, two men contemplating how fear of sharing abundance often ensures that abundance dies before it can truly flourish. This story shows us how hoarding rare gifts ensures they die with us rather than multiply for generations. Sohan discovered that protecting abundance through secrecy ultimately destroys the very thing we're trying to preserve. Buddhism teaches that all phenomena arise through interdependence and connection, and that isolation leads to vulnerability and extinction. When we choose to hoard rather than share, we plant seeds of scarcity that grow into the loss of the very abundance we sought to protect. Let your breathing slow and deepen now. Feel how each breath connects you to the vast abundance of air that surrounds our planet, freely available to all, never depleted by sharing. Notice how your body takes what it needs and returns what it doesn't require, participating in the endless cycle of giving and receiving. Rest in this natural rhythm of connection and exchange. We turn now to a temple courtyard where incense burned at dawn and dusk, and where a priest learned that corrupting sacred offerings creates a hunger that devours the very faith we claim to serve. In a hill town where temple bells rang across terraced fields and pilgrims climbed stone steps worn smooth by countless faithful feet, there served a priest named Madhav, who had been ordained to tend the sacred fires and receive the offerings that devotees brought to honor the divine. The temple had stood for 3 centuries, its carved pillars and painted walls bearing witness to generations of prayers answered and blessings received. Madhav's duties were ancient and precise. Each morning, he lit the sacred lamps with oil pressed from seeds grown in the temple's own groves. He prepared the ritual foods from grains donated by farming families. He arranged flowers brought by devotees into garlands that would grace the deity's image throughout the day. Most importantly, he received the monetary offerings that people brought as expressions of their devotion, carefully recording each donation in the temple's ledgers before placing the coins in the sacred treasury. The offerings varied according to each family's circumstances. Wealthy merchants might donate gold coins, along with their prayers for successful ventures. Middle-class families brought silver along with requests for their children's health and education. Poor laborers offered copper coins with hopes for steady work and enough food to feed their households. All offerings, regardless of size, were supposed to be treated with equal reverence, for they represented the sincere devotion of hearts seeking connection with the divine. For his first 3 years of service, Madhav had followed these protocols exactly. He recorded every donation meticulously, stored all offerings in the designated treasury, and ensured that the temple's accounts were transparent and accurate. The head priest praised his conscientiousness, and devotees trusted that their contributions were being used for sacred purposes, maintaining the temple, feeding pilgrims, supporting religious festivals, and caring for the poor. But as Madhav became more familiar with the temple's operations, he began to notice patterns in the offering flow. He observed which devotees came regularly, and which visited only occasionally. He learned to recognize the wealthy donors who might not notice if their recorded offerings were slightly less than what they had actually given. He discovered that many people who made large donations never asked to see the ledgers or questioned how their money was being used. Gradually, a dangerous idea took shape in his mind. If he reduced the recorded amounts of certain donations by small percentages, who would know? The devotees were focused on their prayers, not on tracking their exact contributions. The head priest trusted Madhav to handle the details and rarely examined individual entries in the ledgers. A few coins here and there, taken from the largest donations, could provide him with funds for personal needs without anyone being the wiser. Madhav began with tiny amounts, reducing a gold coin donation by the value of 1 silver coin, or recording 10 silver coins when 12 had actually been given. He told himself these were merely reasonable fees for his administrative work, compensation that the temple should have been providing anyway. He convinced himself that he was only taking what he deserved for his careful handling of sacred duties. The system worked smoothly for months. Madhav's personal finances improved while the temple's operations continued normally. The amounts he took were small enough that the temple's overall budget remained adequate for its needs, and his careful selection of targets meant that no individual devotee noticed discrepancies in their recorded donations. Emboldened by this success, Madhav began taking larger amounts. He expanded his theft to include medium-sized donations, reasoning that families who could afford substantial offerings wouldn't miss small reductions. He developed sophisticated methods for covering his tracks, sometimes recording donations under fictional names, sometimes simply failing to record portions of what he received, sometimes claiming that certain coins were damaged or counterfeit and needed to be exchanged. For 2 years, Madhav lived increasingly well on stolen devotion. He upgraded his personal quarters with comforts that his official salary could never have provided. He ate better food, wore better clothes, and enjoyed luxuries that distinguished him from other temple servants. He felt clever for having discovered an invisible source of income and justified his theft by the careful service he provided to the temple's daily operations. But theft from sacred offerings carries consequences that extend beyond mere financial loss. When we steal from devotion, we corrupt the very spiritual environment we inhabit, poisoning the atmosphere of faith that sustains both community and personal practice. Madhav began experiencing changes he didn't initially connect to his actions. His own prayers, which had once brought him peace and connection, started feeling mechanical and empty. The sacred rituals he performed daily became mere routine rather than spiritual practice. The presence he had once felt in the temple, the sense of divine awareness that had originally drawn him to religious service, seemed to fade, leaving him surrounded by beautiful objects and ancient rituals that no longer carried meaning. He told himself this was natural spiritual evolution, the maturation that comes with familiarity. He assumed that the intense devotion of his early years had simply settled into professional competence. But the emptiness was deeper than mere routine. It was the spiritual starvation that comes when we feed on what should nourish others. The crisis came during the temple's most important annual festival. For this celebration, devotees from dozens of villages made pilgrimages to offer their year's most generous donations. Families saved throughout the year to make substantial offerings during this sacred time, believing that gifts given during the festival carried special spiritual power. Among the pilgrims was an elderly widow named Kamala, who had walked for 3 days to reach the temple. She had sold her last piece of jewelry, a gold bracelet her deceased husband had given her on their wedding day, to make an offering that she hoped would ensure her son's recovery from a serious illness. The bracelet had been traded for coins representing her life's final treasure, and she placed this money before the deity's image with tears of hope and desperation. Madhav watched her prayer, observed her devotion, and saw the substantial donation she made. Following his established pattern, he recorded only half the amount she had actually given, pocketing the difference while she prostrated herself before the sacred image, pouring out her heart in supplication for her son's healing. But this theft was different from the others. Kamala's offering represented not surplus wealth, but ultimate sacrifice. She had given everything she possessed, trusting that the divine would receive her complete devotion and respond with the miracle her son needed. When Madhav stole half her offering, he wasn't just taking money, he was stealing from her faith, diminishing the completeness of her surrender, corrupting the purity of her sacrifice. Within days, word came from Kamala's village that her son had died. When she learned of his death, she returned to the temple in grief and confusion, seeking understanding from the priests about why her complete offering had not been sufficient to save him. She asked to see the record of her donation, wanting to understand if she had somehow given inadequately, if her sacrifice had been too small to merit divine intervention. Madhav showed her the ledger entry, which recorded half of what she had actually given. Kamala stared at the number in confusion. "But I gave twice this amount," she said quietly. "I sold everything I owned. I placed all of it before the deity." Madhav's practiced explanations felt different when facing this grieving mother. He suggested she might have miscounted, might have been confused by grief, might have made an error in her calculation. But Kamala had sold only one bracelet and knew exactly what it had brought. Her memory was clear and her math was simple. "I gave everything I had," she repeated, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "This record shows I gave only half my everything. But you cannot give half of everything. Either you give all or you give less than all." Other pilgrims gathered to listen to this exchange, drawn by the widow's quiet distress and her puzzling insistence about her donation amount. Among them was a merchant named Vishnu, who had noticed similar discrepancies in his own recorded offerings over the past year. He had dismissed these differences as clerical errors, but Kamala's certainty made him reconsider. Vishnu asked to see his own donation records, and other devotees began making similar requests. As they compared their memories with the ledger entries, a pattern of systematic reduction became clear. Many of the largest donations had been recorded at amounts smaller than what the devotees remembered giving. The head priest was summoned to investigate these claims. When he examined the ledgers carefully, comparing them with his own memory of the temple's recent prosperity, he realized that the recorded donations were insufficient to account for the temple's actual financial health. Money was flowing in beyond what the books reflected, but that excess was not reaching the temple treasury. Confronted with evidence and testimony from multiple devotees, Madhav's carefully constructed explanations collapsed. The truth emerged like water through a cracked dam. 2 years of systematic theft, hundreds of corrupted offerings, thousands of coins stolen from the faithful who had trusted their most precious devotions to sacred keeping. But the discovery of financial theft revealed something deeper and more disturbing. As the investigation continued, it became clear that Madhav's corruption had infected the entire spiritual environment of the temple. Other priests reported that their own meditation and prayer had become difficult in recent months. Devotees mentioned that the temple somehow felt less peaceful, less conducive to spiritual experience. The sacred fires, while still burning brightly, seemed to carry less presence, less power to inspire and heal. An old monk who visited the temple regularly explained what had happened. "When we steal from offerings," he told the assembled priests and devotees, "we don't just take money, we take faith. We steal from the very spiritual atmosphere that allows temples to function as bridges between human need and divine grace." Madhav sat in silence as the full scope of his corruption was revealed. He had thought he was simply taking money that wouldn't be missed, but he had actually been feeding on the spiritual substance of the community's devotion. Each theft had weakened the temple's capacity to serve its sacred function, had diminished the environment of faith that allowed people like Kamala to make complete offerings with confidence that they would be received purely. "I never meant to harm anyone's faith," he said finally. "I just took some coins." "There are no just coins in sacred space," the old monk replied gently. "Every offering carries the devotion of the giver. When you steal the offering, you steal the devotion. When you corrupt the gift, you corrupt the giving. What you fed on was not money, it was faith itself." The monk explained how sacred systems work, how they depend on trust and purity to maintain their function as channels for grace. "A temple where offerings are stolen becomes like a river poisoned at its source," he said. "The corruption flows downstream to affect everyone who drinks from those waters." They looked around the beautiful temple, its carved pillars, painted walls, and golden images unchanged by Madhav's theft. But the spiritual atmosphere, the sense of sacred presence that had made this place a destination for pilgrims, had been damaged by the corruption of its offerings. It would take time and conscious purification to restore what had been lost. This story shows us how corrupting sacred offerings creates a hunger that devours the faith we claim to serve. Madhav discovered that when we steal from devotion, we don't just take money, we consume the spiritual substance that allows sacred spaces to function. Buddhism teaches that our actions affect not just physical circumstances, but spiritual environments, and that corruption in sacred contexts spreads like poison through the systems designed to connect human need with divine grace. When we choose to feed on others' faith, we plant seeds that grow into the destruction of our own capacity for spiritual experience. Let us rest here in this understanding. Breathe gently and feel how your heart continues its steady rhythm, unforced and natural. Notice how your body knows how to be at peace, how to release what is not needed, how to receive what sustains life. There is nothing you must figure out right now, nothing you must solve. Simply be here, supported by this moment's simple presence. Now let us journey to a village crossroads where a well provided water for all who passed, and where a keeper learned that poisoning common resources ensures we too will eventually drink from the contamination we have created. At the intersection of 3 roads, where travelers from different regions met to trade goods and share news, there stood a well that had served the community for longer than anyone could remember. The well was deep, and its water was sweet, fed by underground springs that never seemed to fail even in the driest seasons. Around this well had grown a small settlement, shops serving travelers, an inn for those who needed rest, homes for families who made their living from the constant flow of people passing through. The well's keeper was a man named Gopal, who had inherited the position from his father, and whose father had inherited it from his grandfather before him. For 3 generations, Gopal's family had maintained the well's stone walls, kept its water clean, and ensured that all travelers could drink freely, regardless of their ability to pay. This was considered sacred work, as water is life itself, and denying water to the thirsty was thought to bring the worst kind of karma to those who would hoard such an essential gift. The well was maintained by contributions from travelers and local merchants, who benefited from the steady trade that the reliable water source attracted. Most people gave willingly, understanding that their contributions supported not just the well's upkeep, but the livelihood of the man who dedicated his life to maintaining this vital resource. For years, this system worked smoothly, with Gopal earning enough from voluntary donations to support his family while keeping the well accessible to all. But as trade routes shifted and new roads were built, the volume of travelers passing through the crossroads began to decline. Fewer people meant fewer contributions, while the well's maintenance costs remained the same. Gopal found his income dropping even as his responsibilities continued unchanged. The well needed the same attention, the same repairs, the same dedication, but the community using it was shrinking. Facing financial pressure for the first time in his life, Gopal began to consider options that would have horrified his father. He could charge fees for water access, turning the traditionally free well into a commercial enterprise. He could restrict usage to paying customers, denying water to those who couldn't afford his prices. He could even sell the well to merchants who would certainly turn it into a profit center. But Gopal chose a different path, one that seemed clever in its subtlety and terrible in its consequences. Instead of charging openly for water access, he began adulterating the well's water with substances that would make travelers sick, not immediately, but after they had continued on their journeys and could not trace their illness back to his well. His method was sophisticated and difficult to detect. He added small amounts of contaminated water from stagnant pools, introduced bacteria that would cause stomach problems days after consumption, and sometimes mixed in substances that would create thirst rather than quenching it, ensuring that people would need to purchase additional water from vendors who paid him commissions for referrals. Gopal told himself he wasn't really poisoning anyone, just making them slightly uncomfortable in ways that would drive business to establishments that shared profits with him. He reasoned that travelers could afford to pay for clean water and food to remedy any digestive issues his adulterants caused. He convinced himself that he was simply adapting to economic realities, finding creative ways to maintain his livelihood in changing times. The scheme worked for several months. Travelers continued drinking from the well, unaware of its contamination. A few days later, as they rested in other towns, they would develop stomach ailments that sent them to local healers and innkeepers who charged premium prices for remedies and private accommodations. Some of these businesses, grateful for the increased trade, began paying Gopal small fees for maintaining the referral system his contaminated well created. Gopal's income stabilized and even increased beyond what it had been during the well's busiest periods. He felt proud of his innovative approach to a difficult situation, pleased that he had found a way to remain prosperous without openly violating the tradition of free water access. Technically, he told himself, the well was still open to all. He simply couldn't guarantee what would happen after people drank from it. But water contamination, like all environmental poisoning, spreads beyond its intended targets. The underground springs that fed the well were connected to other water sources throughout the region. The bacteria and toxins Gopal introduced began affecting not just travelers, but the entire water system that sustained local agriculture and wildlife. Crops in nearby fields started showing signs of mysterious diseases. Livestock, drinking from streams connected to the underground springs, developed illnesses that veterinarians couldn't easily diagnose. Wild animals began avoiding the area, disrupting the ecological balance that had sustained the region for centuries. The contamination spread through the water table like corruption through a community, affecting everything that depended on the purity Gopal had destroyed. The crisis reached its peak during the monsoon season, when heavy rains should have replenished all water sources, and washed away any temporary contamination. Instead, the rains carried Gopal's pollutants deeper into the ground and further through the connected waterways, spreading the contamination to wells and streams throughout the district. Villages that had never heard of Gopal or his crossroads began experiencing water-related illnesses. Children developed fevers from drinking what had always been clean well water. Farmers watched their crops fail from irrigation that had sustained their fields for generations. Animals sickened and died from consuming water that had been pure until Gopal's contamination reached their drinking sources. Regional authorities were called in to investigate the spreading water crisis. They traced the contamination backward through the connected underground systems, following the trail of pollution to its source. When they tested the water at Gopal's well, the first place most victims had encountered the region's water system, they found concentrations of harmful bacteria and toxins that could only have been introduced deliberately. Gopal was arrested and questioned about the contamination. Faced with scientific evidence of deliberate pollution, his careful explanations collapsed quickly. He admitted to adulterating the well water, but insisted he had never intended to cause widespread harm. He claimed he was only trying to create minor digestive issues that would benefit businesses in other towns, not poison entire communities. But intention matters little when dealing with environmental systems. The investigators explained that water contamination follows natural laws, regardless of the contaminator's motives. Poison introduced into connected water systems spreads according to hydrogeology, not human planning. Gopal's targeted contamination had become regional disaster because he had failed to understand that all water is ultimately connected. The full scope of the disaster became clear over the following weeks. Dozens of villages had been affected. Hundreds of people had fallen ill. Thousands of animals had been sickened or killed. Crops across multiple districts had failed. The economic damage ran into amounts that Gopal could never hope to repay, and the environmental damage would take decades to fully remedy. But the cruelest irony was still to come. As the contamination investigation continued, authorities realized that Gopal's own family had also been affected by his poisoning of the well. His wife had developed a chronic illness that doctors initially attributed to unknown causes. His children had suffered repeated stomach ailments that had puzzled local healers. His elderly mother had weakened significantly, her health declining in ways that seemed mysteriously connected to digestive problems. When medical investigators tested Gopal's family for the same toxins found in the contaminated well, they discovered that the well keeper and his household had been consuming their own poisoned water for months. The contamination Gopal had introduced to harm strangers had also been slowly poisoning the people he loved most. Gopal sat in custody, staring at medical reports that showed how his scheme to profit from others' sickness had created the very illnesses that were destroying his own family. His wife's chronic condition matched the symptoms experienced by travelers who had drunk from his well months earlier. His children's recurring stomach problems followed the same patterns seen in affected villages throughout the region. His mother's decline paralleled the deterioration experienced by elderly people in other communities touched by his contamination. "I only wanted to make them a little sick," he told the investigating officer. "Just uncomfortable enough to need remedies in other towns. I never meant to poison my own family." The officer looked at the map showing how water systems connect throughout the region. "Water doesn't recognize intention," she replied gently. "When you poison the source, you poison everyone downstream, including yourself. Your well serves your family's water needs too." Gopal realized he had been drinking his own contaminated water every day, feeding it to his children at every meal, giving it to his wife and mother with every cup of tea. the very contamination he had created to make others sick had been slowly poisoning his own household from the moment he began adulterating the well. An elderly doctor who specialized in environmental poisoning visited Gopal in custody. She explained how water contamination works, how toxins introduced at any point in a connected system eventually affect everyone who depends on that system. "You cannot poison the well without drinking the poison yourself," she told him quietly. "Water flows in circles, not lines. What you put into the common source will always return to you." She showed him charts demonstrating how the underground springs connected his well to every water source in the region, including the smaller wells that served his own household. "You thought you were harming strangers and helping yourself," she continued. "But water systems don't distinguish between stranger and family, enemy and friend. Contamination flows where water flows, affecting everyone equally." Gopal understood that his scheme had been doomed from its conception. By poisoning the common resource, he had guaranteed that he too would eventually consume the contamination he had created. The very water he had adulterated to harm others had become the slow poison that was destroying his own family's health. This story shows us how poisoning common resources ensures we too will drink from the contamination we create. Gopal discovered that water systems don't distinguish between intended victims and beloved family members. Pollution flows where physics directs it, not where malice intends it. Buddhism teaches that we cannot harm others without harming ourselves, because all beings are connected through the shared systems that sustain life. When we choose to contaminate what serves everyone, we plant seeds that grow into the poisoning of our own wellspring. Rest here now and feel how your breath connects you to the vast atmosphere that sustains all life on Earth. Notice how the air you exhale becomes part of the shared environment that nourishes plants and feeds other beings. Let yourself relax into this natural interconnection, this seamless web of giving and receiving that supports all existence without prejudice or preference. We have explored tonight the hard teachings that our ancestors knew must be passed down, how the harm we cause others becomes the suffering we ourselves must face, how the seeds we plant in darkness always grow toward light, revealing everything we thought we had hidden. Through Aaron's bridge built with stolen silver, Deepa's marketplace corrupted by false saffron, Ramesh's violent washing that drove away trust, Sohan's hoarded abundance that died in isolation, Madhav's theft from sacred offerings, and Gopal's poisoned well that contaminated his own family. We have seen how karma works not as punishment from above, but as the natural consequence of actions rippling through the interconnected web of existence. Each story has shown us the same truth. We cannot separate ourselves from the consequences of our choices. The bridge builder's greed killed his own brother. The spice merchant's fraud corrupted her daughter's wedding. The washerman's violence destroyed his livelihood. The farmer's hoarding ensured his treasure died with him. The priest's theft from devotion poisoned his own capacity for spiritual experience. The well-keeper's contamination flowed back to sicken his beloved family. Buddhism teaches us that this is not cosmic justice, but natural law, as reliable as gravity, as predictable as sunrise. When we plant seeds of harm, we create the conditions that will eventually harvest suffering in our own lives. When we corrupt the systems we depend on, we guarantee our own involvement in that corruption. When we poison what serves everyone, we ensure that we too will drink from contaminated sources. But in seeing clearly how harm returns to its source, we also glimpse the profound hope hidden in karma's teaching. If our harmful actions create the conditions for our own suffering, then our beneficial actions must create the conditions for our own joy. If corruption spreads through systems to affect everyone, including ourselves, then purity and kindness must spread the same way. If we cannot escape the consequences of our choices, then choosing wisely becomes the most practical thing we can do. The deepest truth these stories whisper is that we are not separate beings competing for limited resources, but interconnected parts of a vast web where the well-being of each affects the well-being of all. When we truly understand this, harming others becomes as impossible as deliberately cutting our own flesh. When we see clearly that there is no other to harm, compassion arises naturally, not as moral obligation, but as simple intelligence. Let your whole body soften now, like cloth soaking in warm water. Feel your shoulders releasing, your jaw relaxing, your entire being settling deeper into rest. Notice how your heart continues its faithful rhythm without your guidance, how your lungs expand and contract in their ancient pattern. You are held by forces larger than your conscious mind, supported by the same interconnected web that connects all existence. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel how each exhale carries away tension, worry, the weight of understanding difficult truths. Let each inhale bring peace, acceptance, the gentle recognition that wisdom comes not to burden us, but to free us from the suffering that ignorance creates. There is nothing you need to figure out right now, nothing you need to fix or change. Simply rest in this moment's simple presence. Your body knows how to sleep, how to release the day's accumulations, how to restore itself through the miracle of rest. Your mind knows how to let go of thoughts, how to settle into the spaciousness that underlies all mental activity. Your heart knows how to soften, how to open, how to trust the vast intelligence that orchestrates every heartbeat, every breath, every movement of life through your being. Let go of trying to understand everything these stories have revealed. Let go of analyzing the lessons or applying them to your own life. The teachings will work on you while you sleep, like seeds planted in fertile soil, sprouting new understanding in the quiet spaces between dreams. Trust that wisdom has its own timeline, its own way of unfolding in consciousness. You are already complete exactly as you are. There is nothing broken in you that needs fixing, nothing missing that needs acquiring. The same awareness that recognized the truth in tonight's stories is your own deepest nature. Clear, compassionate, naturally wise. Rest in that recognition like a child resting in loving arms. Feel your body becoming heavier, more relaxed, settling into sleep like a stone sinking through still water. Let your mind become quieter, thoughts arising less frequently, attention gathering itself into the single point of peaceful presence. Let your heart become more spacious, expanding to hold everything with gentle acceptance. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do, no one else you need to become. This moment is enough. You are enough. Everything is complete as it is, perfect in its imperfection, whole in its brokenness, sacred in its ordinary humanity. Sleep well, dear friend. Let these teachings settle into your dreams like moonlight settling on still water. Let wisdom arise naturally in your heart, like flowers blooming in spring, unhurried, unforced, following the ancient patterns that know exactly when and how to unfold. Thank you for joining us tonight at Sleepy Monk. May you rest deeply and wake refreshed, carrying forward the gentle understanding that all beings are connected, all actions have consequences, and all suffering points the way toward greater compassion. Sleep peacefully and dream well. Let us explore one final story before we rest completely, one that takes us to a workshop where musical instruments were crafted with love, and where an artisan learned that destroying beauty in others' lives ensures we lose our own capacity to create anything worth treasuring. In a quarter of the city where narrow lanes echoed with the sounds of many crafts, hammers on metal, looms clacking their rhythms, potter's wheels spinning their ancient songs, there lived a man named Vikram who made musical instruments with skills passed down through 5 generations of his family. His workshop occupied the ground floor of an old house, its walls lined with sitars in various stages of completion, tabla drums waiting for their final tuning, and flutes carved from bamboo that grew in his own garden behind the building. Vikram's instruments were known throughout the region for their exceptional tone and craftsmanship. Musicians would travel great distances to commission sitars from his hands, knowing that his instruments possessed a quality that turned competent players into artists, and artists into masters. The secret lay not just in his technical skills, but in his deep love for music itself. Every instrument he created was made with the hope that it would bring joy to both player and listener for generations to come. His workshop was a place of constant music. Customers would test instruments, students would practice on pieces they hoped to purchase, and Vikram himself would play throughout the day as he worked, ensuring that each sitar sang clearly, each drum resonated with proper depth, each flute breathed with the voice he intended. The sounds flowing from his workshop created an atmosphere of beauty that enriched the entire neighborhood. But success brought competition. Other instrument makers, seeing Vikram's prosperity and reputation, began setting up workshops in the same district. Some were skilled craftsmen who added to the area's musical atmosphere. Others were less capable, but charged lower prices, appealing to customers who valued economy over quality. The presence of multiple workshops created a small music district that attracted even more customers, initially benefiting everyone involved. Among the new arrivals was a young man named Ravi, who had learned basic instrument-making skills, but lacked the deeper understanding that creates truly fine pieces. Ravi's instruments looked acceptable to casual observers, but failed to satisfy serious musicians who could detect the subtle flaws in tone and construction that marked inferior work. His business struggled while Vikram's continued to thrive, creating resentment that would eventually poison the entire musical community. Unable to match Vikram's quality through improved craftsmanship, Ravi chose a different path to success. He began spreading subtle criticisms about Vikram's work, suggesting to potential customers that the older craftsman's methods were outdated, his prices inflated, his reputation based more on past achievement than current ability. These whispers were difficult to refute because they contained enough truth to seem plausible. Vikram did use traditional methods, his prices were higher, and his reputation did rest partly on decades of excellence. When subtle criticism proved insufficient to redirect business toward his own workshop, Ravi escalated to direct sabotage. He began visiting musicians who owned Vikram's instruments, offering to improve them with modern techniques at very reasonable prices. But instead of improving the instruments, Ravi deliberately damaged them in ways that would create problems days or weeks later, after the musician had already paid for the supposed enhancement. His methods were sophisticated and hard to trace. He would slightly misalign the bridge on a sitar, creating tuning problems that would develop gradually. He would weaken the tension rods on tabla drums so they would fail during performance. He would introduce hairline cracks in flute mouthpieces that would affect tone quality over time. Each act of sabotage was designed to make the musician believe that Vikram's original craftsmanship was flawed, that the instruments were failing due to poor construction rather than deliberate damage. The scheme worked better than Ravi had dared hope. Musicians began returning to Vikram with complaints about instruments that had previously performed beautifully. They demanded repairs, refunds, or explanations for failures that seemed to indicate shoddy original construction. Vikram's reputation began to suffer as word spread that his instruments were unreliable, prone to sudden failure at crucial moments. Vikram examined each returned instrument carefully, puzzled by the types of failures he was seeing. The damage patterns didn't match natural wear or accidental harm. They showed signs of deliberate interference by someone who understood instrument construction well enough to cause specific problems. But he couldn't prove tampering, and customers interpreted his suggestions about sabotage as attempts to avoid responsibility for poor workmanship. For a year, Ravi's sabotage campaign continued. He damaged dozens of Vikram's instruments while simultaneously positioning himself as the reliable alternative who could repair what the old master had allegedly constructed poorly. His business grew as Vikram's declined, and he felt satisfied with the success of his strategy. He had found a way to win customers without improving his own skills, simply by destroying confidence in his competitors' work. But musical instruments exist to create beauty, and when beauty is destroyed, the destruction spreads beyond its intended targets. The musicians whose instruments Ravi damaged began avoiding live performance, fearing that their unreliable pieces would fail at crucial moments. Some gave up playing altogether, unwilling to risk the embarrassment of public breakdown. Others switched to different instruments, abandoning years of training on pieces they no longer trusted. The effect rippled through the musical community like poison through water. Fewer performances meant fewer opportunities for musicians to make their living. Reduced demand for live music affected the venues that hosted concerts, the audiences who had enjoyed regular musical entertainment, and the cultural life of the entire region. The music district that had been growing around multiple workshops began to wither as fewer people sought instruments they might not be able to trust. Even Ravi's own business began to suffer from the general decline in musical activity. Customers who had switched to his instruments because of problems with Vikram's pieces found themselves less motivated to play when the broader musical community was shrinking. Some discovered that instruments they couldn't fully trust became sources of anxiety rather than joy, turning musical practice from pleasure into worry. The crisis reached its peak during the city's annual music festival, an event that had been growing larger and more prestigious each year as the music district developed. This festival was the year's most important showcase for local musicians, the time when they could perform before visiting artists and talent scouts who might offer new opportunities for their careers. On the festival's opening night, disaster struck in the most public way possible. 3 different musicians suffered instrument failures during their performances. A sitar bridge collapsed mid-song, a tabla drum split during a complex rhythm, and a flute cracked while playing a delicate melody. All 3 instruments had been made by Vikram and recently improved by Ravi, though the audience and judges only knew about the original maker's name. The simultaneous failures were so dramatic and embarrassing that festival organizers were forced to cancel the remaining performances, unable to risk further equipment breakdowns that would humiliate both performers and audience. The festival's reputation was damaged, visiting musicians and critics left with negative impressions, and local musicians faced the worst possible outcome, their moment of opportunity destroyed by unreliable instruments. Word of the festival disaster spread quickly through regional musical networks. Musicians began avoiding instruments made in the city entirely, preferring to travel to distant workshops rather than risk association with the apparently declining quality of local craftsmanship. Music teachers stopped recommending local makers to their students. The district that had been developing into a center for musical arts became known instead as a place where instruments were likely to fail when they were needed most. Vikram's workshop, once filled with the sounds of testing and practice, became quiet except for the noise of his own solitary work. Musicians stopped visiting, students stayed away, and even his oldest customers began seeking instruments elsewhere. He continued crafting with the same care and skill he had always used, but reputation is harder to restore than to destroy, and the damage to his name seemed irreversible. But Ravi discovered that destroying another's capacity to create beauty inevitably destroys one's own creativity as well. As his sabotage campaign succeeded in driving away Vikram's customers, Ravi found himself losing the very skills he had once possessed. His hands, which had grown accustomed to damaging instruments rather than perfecting them, began producing increasingly poor work. His ear, trained to detect flaws he could exploit rather than tones he could enhance, lost its ability to distinguish between good and mediocre sound quality. More troubling still, the act of deliberate destruction had poisoned his relationship with music itself. Where he had once felt joy in creating instruments that would bring happiness to others, he now approached his craft with cynicism and calculation, seeing each piece primarily as a source of profit rather than an opportunity to serve beauty. The music that had originally inspired him to learn instrument making began to sound hollow and meaningless, as if his capacity to appreciate beauty had been damaged along with the instruments he had sabotaged. The final revelation came when Ravi's own workshop was approached by a master musician from a distant city, someone who had heard about the local music district and wanted to commission a truly exceptional sitar for an important performance. This was the kind of opportunity Ravi had dreamed of when he first began his campaign against Vikram, a chance to create an instrument for a renowned artist whose endorsement could establish his reputation permanently. But when Ravi sat down to begin crafting this crucial instrument, he discovered that his skills had deteriorated beyond recovery. His hands, corrupted by months of deliberate damage, could no longer execute the precise movements that fine craftsmanship required. His ear, trained to detect opportunities for sabotage, could no longer hear the subtle differences that distinguish exceptional instruments from ordinary ones. His heart, hardened by systematic destruction of others' work, could no longer connect with the love of beauty that makes great instruments possible. The sitar he produced for the master musician was technically adequate, but spiritually empty, a lifeless piece that met basic functional requirements while utterly failing to inspire either player or listener. When the musician tested the instrument, he set it aside immediately, recognizing that it lacked the essential quality that transforms mere wood and metal into a vehicle for transcendent music. "This instrument has no soul," the musician told Ravi sadly. "It is constructed correctly, but created without love. I cannot perform on something that carries no music within itself." The musician left without purchasing anything, and word of his assessment spread through the networks that connect serious artists. Ravi's reputation, built on the destruction of Vikram's credibility, crumbled when tested against the standards that truly matter in creating beautiful instruments. That evening, as Ravi sat alone in his workshop surrounded by instruments that looked adequate but sang with hollow voices, an old tabla master who had known both craftsmen for many years came to speak with him. The master had watched the music district's decline with the sorrow of someone who had seen beauty destroyed by petty competition. "You spent so much time breaking others' instruments that you broke your own hands," the master observed gently, examining one of Ravi's recent pieces. "You trained your ears to hear flaws instead of beauty, and now beauty sounds like nothing to you." Ravi looked at his hands, seeing for the first time how they had changed during his months of sabotage. Where they had once been steady and sensitive, capable of detecting the subtle responses of wood and metal to careful shaping, they now moved with the roughness of someone accustomed to destruction rather than creation. "I only wanted to win customers away from Vikram," he said defensively. "I wanted to succeed." "Did you succeed?" the master asked, Do you have what you wanted? Ravi looked around his empty workshop, at the instruments that failed to inspire, at the silence where music should have filled the air. His sabotage campaign had indeed driven customers away from Vikram, but it had also destroyed the musical community that sustained all instrument makers. In winning his competition with Vikram, he had eliminated the very environment in which either of them could truly succeed. I destroyed what I was trying to join, Ravi realized. I killed the music to win the musicians. The master nodded sadly. When you make your living by destroying beauty, you lose your own capacity to create anything beautiful. Your hands learn destruction, your ears hear only flaws, your heart grows cold toward the very thing you claim to serve. They sat together in the workshop as darkness settled over the quiet music district. Two men surrounded by instruments that looked like music, but had forgotten how to sing, in a neighborhood that had once celebrated beauty, but now echoed with the silence that follows when creativity is corrupted by competition taken too far. This story shows us how destroying beauty in others' lives ensures we lose our own capacity to create anything worth treasuring. Ravi discovered that when we train our hands to damage rather than build, we corrupt our own ability to craft with love and skill. Buddhism teaches that the energy we put into the world shapes not just our external circumstances, but our internal capacities. When we choose destruction over creation, we plant seeds that grow into the loss of our own creative gifts. When we poison others' joy, we guarantee that our own joy will wither. Let your breathing become even gentler now, like the breath of someone already halfway to dreams. Feel your body sinking deeper into rest, your muscles releasing all tension, your entire being settling into the profound relaxation that prepares for sleep. Notice how your heart continues its faithful work, how your blood flows smoothly through your body, how every system operates in perfect harmony without your conscious guidance. We have traveled far together tonight through the landscapes of consequence and understanding. We have seen how every action plants seeds that grow into experiences we must eventually face, how the harm we cause others becomes the suffering we ourselves inherit, how the corruption we introduce into shared systems inevitably flows back to contaminate our own lives. Through 7 stories, we have witnessed the inexorable working of karma, not as divine punishment, but as natural law, as reliable as gravity, and as predictable as the sunrise. We have seen that we cannot separate ourselves from the web of interconnection that links all existence, cannot harm others without ultimately harming ourselves, cannot poison common resources without eventually drinking from our own contamination. But in recognizing how our harmful actions return to teach us their hardest lessons, we have also glimpsed the profound hope hidden within karma's teaching. If negative actions create negative consequences, then positive actions must create positive results. If corruption spreads through systems to affect everyone, then purity and kindness must spread the same way. If we cannot escape the results of our choices, then choosing wisdom becomes the most practical path available. The deepest truth whispered by these ancient stories is that apparent separation is illusion. We are not isolated beings competing for scarce resources, but interconnected expressions of a single life that flows through countless forms. When we truly see this, harming others becomes as impossible as deliberately injuring our own body. When we understand that there is no other to exploit, compassion arises naturally, not as moral obligation, but as simple intelligence. Rest now in this understanding. Let your whole being soften like earth receiving gentle rain. Feel how you are held by the same forces that hold the stars in their courses, supported by the same intelligence that guides rivers to the sea and seasons through their endless dance. You are part of something vast and beautiful, connected to every other being through invisible threads of shared existence. Your mind naturally knows how to release the day's accumulations, how to let go of thoughts that no longer serve, how to settle into the spaciousness that has always been your deepest nature. There is nothing you need to figure out, nothing you need to remember from tonight's teachings. The wisdom will work in you like seeds in dark soil, sprouting new understanding in the quiet spaces between waking and sleeping. Let go completely now. Let go of any effort to stay alert, any attempt to analyze or process what you have heard. Trust that your deeper mind will integrate these teachings in its own perfect timing. That understanding will bloom naturally like flowers following their season, unhurried and unforced. Feel your eyelids becoming heavy, your breathing becoming slower and deeper. Notice how your body seems to be dissolving into the surface that supports you. Boundaries softening, weight releasing into gravity's gentle embrace. You are safe here, completely protected, held by forces larger than your individual will. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight, nothing else you need to accomplish, no one else you need to become. This moment is complete in itself, perfect in its simplicity, sacred in its ordinary peace. Rest in this recognition, like a child resting in loving arms, trusting completely in the intelligence that beats your heart and moves your breath without your conscious intervention. Your awareness is becoming more spacious now, expanding beyond the boundaries of your physical form, touching the vast field of consciousness that connects all beings. In this expanded awareness, you can feel your kinship with everything that lives. Plants breathing in darkness, animals resting in their natural rhythms, other humans settling into sleep all around the world. Let yourself merge with this universal rhythm of rest and restoration. Feel how your individual sleep becomes part of the great cycle that refreshes all life, how your dreams will connect with the dreaming of countless others, how your healing contributes to the healing of the whole web of existence. Sleep is coming naturally now, like a tide returning to shore, inevitable and welcome. Your conscious mind is stepping back, allowing deeper processes to take over, trusting in the profound intelligence that orchestrates every cell's renewal, every nerve's restoration, every memory's integration into the vast library of your experience. Let the last traces of effort dissolve. Let thinking become background whisper, then silence. Let your identity as separate self fade into the broader identity that includes all beings, all experiences, all possibilities for growth and healing and awakening. You are already perfect as you are. There is nothing broken that needs fixing, nothing missing that needs finding, nothing wrong that needs correcting. The awareness that has been listening to these words is itself the Buddha nature that all teachings point toward. Clear, compassionate, naturally wise, eternally at peace. Rest in that recognition as you drift into sleep. Let it be the last conscious thought that accompanies you into dreams, that you are already whole, already awakened, already home in the vastness of your true nature. All searching can end here. All effort can cease. All worry can dissolve into the fundamental okayness of simply being alive in this mysterious and beautiful universe. The teachings will continue their work while you sleep, like medicine healing the body without conscious supervision, like rain nourishing roots in darkness. Trust this process completely. Trust that wisdom knows its own way of unfolding, that understanding ripens in its own season, that the heart opens according to its own perfect timing. Feel yourself sinking now into the deepest rest, the most complete letting go, the most profound trust in life's essential goodness. Your breath is becoming a whisper, your heartbeat a distant drum, your thoughts like clouds dissolving in endless sky. You are held, beloved, supported, safe. The same love that moves the stars and grows the flowers is holding you now, guiding you into the healing darkness of sleep, the restorative mystery of dreams, the profound rest that prepares consciousness for another day of learning, growing, and serving the endless awakening of life itself. Sleep peacefully, dear friend. Dream deeply. Rest completely. Let karma's difficult lessons transform into wisdom's gentle guidance. Let understanding bloom like lotus flowers in the mind's clear waters. Let compassion expand like dawn light, touching the earth with unconditional love. All is well. All is exactly as it should be. You are exactly who you need to be, learning exactly what you need to learn, healing exactly what needs healing in this perfect moment of surrender to sleep's ancient wisdom. The night holds you now like a mother holding her child. Rest in that embrace. Trust that tomorrow's light will find you refreshed, renewed, and ready to meet whatever comes with greater wisdom, deeper compassion, and clearer understanding of the interconnected web that holds us all. But wait. There is one more teaching that wishes to be shared before we rest completely. One final story that has been waiting in the shadows of consciousness, patient as moonlight on still water. Let us listen to this last whisper from the ancestors, this final lesson about how the compassion we withhold from others creates the very hardness that eventually breaks our own hearts. In a valley where mist gathered each dawn among terraced fields and small farmhouses dotted the hillsides like scattered seeds, there lived a woman named Kamala, who served as the village's healer, tending to illnesses of body and spirit, with knowledge passed down through generations of wise women in her family. Her house sat at the valley's center, its rooms filled with clay pots containing herbs and remedies, its garden growing the medicinal plants that formed the foundation of her practice. For 20 years, Kamala had served her community with skill and dedication, treating everything from children's fevers to old people's chronic pains, from broken bones to broken hearts. Her reputation extended beyond her own village to neighboring settlements, and people would sometimes walk for days to receive her care when other healers had failed to help them. Kamala's approach to healing was both practical and spiritual. She understood that true healing required not just the right herbs and treatments, but also compassion, patience, and genuine care for the whole person who sought her help. She would listen carefully to each patient's concerns, provide treatments with gentle hands, and offer the kind of presence that itself served as medicine for souls worn down by suffering. Her success as a healer brought prosperity to her household. Patients paid what they could, sometimes in coins, sometimes in grain or vegetables, sometimes in services like repairing her roof or tending her garden. Over the years, these contributions had allowed Kamala to accumulate modest wealth, expand her house, and live more comfortably than most villagers. She felt grateful for her good fortune and proud of the service she provided to her community. But prosperity also brought something unexpected, a growing sense of superiority over those she served. As Kamala's reputation spread and her wealth increased, she began to see herself not just as a skilled healer, but as fundamentally different from and better than the ordinary villagers who sought her help. They came to her desperate and suffering, while she remained healthy and successful. They struggled with poverty and hardship, while she lived in comfort and security. This sense of superiority was subtle at first, expressing itself mainly in small ways. A slight impatience with patients who couldn't clearly describe their symptoms, a touch of condescension when explaining treatments to people she considered less educated, a mild irritation when dealing with conditions she found tedious or uninteresting. But gradually, Kamala's attitude hardened into something more problematic. She began categorizing her patients not just by their medical needs, but by their social status, their ability to pay, and her personal judgment of their worthiness for her attention. Wealthy farmers and successful merchants received her full care and attention, while poor laborers and landless families found themselves treated with increasing curtness and minimal effort. The transformation was most noticeable in how Kamala responded to patients whose conditions were chronic, difficult, or unlikely to improve significantly. In her early years of practice, she had treated such cases with extra patience and compassion, understanding that people facing long-term suffering needed emotional support as much as medical intervention. But now, she found herself viewing these patients as burdens, as drains on her time and energy that prevented her from focusing on more rewarding cases. When Devi, an elderly widow who suffered from painful arthritis, came for her regular treatments, Kamala would rush through the consultation, prescribe the same remedies without careful examination, and dismiss her concerns about increasing pain with comments like, "What do you expect at your age?" When Mohan, a young man with a mental condition that caused periodic episodes of confusion and distress, sought help during his difficult periods, Kamala would treat him with barely concealed impatience, providing minimal care, while making it clear she considered his condition more troublesome than deserving of genuine attention. Most telling was Kamala's treatment of Priya, a woman whose husband had abandoned her, leaving her to raise 3 young children while struggling with a chronic illness that caused severe fatigue and recurring pain. Priya could rarely afford to pay the full cost of treatments, and her condition required ongoing care rather than quick cure. Kamala began seeing her as the worst kind of patient, demanding, needy, unable to pay properly, and unlikely to improve enough to justify the effort required. During Priya's visits, Kamala would barely look up from grinding herbs or organizing supplies. She would ask perfunctory questions, prescribe the cheapest remedies available, and make it clear through her body language and tone that she considered these consultations an unwelcome interruption to more important work. When Priya tried to describe new symptoms or express concerns about her children's health, Kamala would cut her off with comments like, "I can only deal with one problem at a time," or "You need to learn to manage these things yourself." For 3 years, this pattern continued. Kamala's practice remained financially successful, supported by wealthier patients who received excellent care and recommended her services to their peers. But her treatment of poorer and more challenging patients grew increasingly cold, creating a 2-tiered system where healing was distributed according to social status and personal preference rather than medical need. The crisis that would transform everything began with what seemed like a minor incident. During the monsoon season, when heavy rains made travel difficult and many people developed respiratory problems, Kamala herself began experiencing unusual fatigue. At first, she attributed this to the increased workload that rainy seasons always brought, the long hours spent treating coughs and fevers throughout the community. But the fatigue persisted, even after the rains ended and her patient load returned to normal. She began noticing other symptoms: joint pain that worsened each morning, difficulty concentrating during consultations, a persistent low-grade fever that came and went without apparent cause. Most concerning of all, she developed a skin condition that created painful, itchy patches on her hands and arms, making it uncomfortable to handle herbs and prepare medicines. As someone who had spent her career diagnosing and treating others, Kamala recognized that her symptoms suggested a serious underlying condition, but like many healers, she was reluctant to seek help from colleagues, preferring to treat herself with her own remedies and knowledge. She tried various combinations of herbs and treatments, adjusted her diet and sleeping patterns, and waited for her body to heal itself, as it had always done when she faced minor illnesses in the past. Instead of improving, her condition worsened. The fatigue became so severe that she could barely function during afternoon hours. The joint pain spread throughout her body, making simple movements difficult and painful. The skin condition on her hands became so inflamed that she had to wear gloves to protect patients from direct contact. But the gloves made precise work with herbs and instruments nearly impossible. Most frightening of all, Kamala began experiencing episodes of mental confusion similar to what she had observed and dismissed in some of her patients. During these episodes, she would lose track of conversations, forget recent events, or find herself unable to remember the properties of herbs she had used successfully for decades. The sharp mind that had been her greatest asset as a healer seemed to be failing her when she needed it most. After 6 months of unsuccessful self-treatment, Kamala was forced to acknowledge that she needed help from other healers. But when she began seeking consultations, she discovered something that shocked her to the core. Her condition was identical to one she had seen and dismissed in multiple patients over recent years. The combination of chronic fatigue, joint pain, skin problems, and periodic confusion matched exactly what Priya, the abandoned mother, had been describing during her visits to Kamala's practice. The realization struck like lightning, illuminating a dark landscape. Kamala understood that she was now experiencing the same symptoms she had treated with impatience and dismissal in patients she had considered burdensome and unworthy of full attention. The very condition she had minimized as just something you have to learn to live with was now destroying her own ability to function and practice healing. But the cruel irony went deeper still. When Kamala sought treatment from other healers, she encountered the same attitudes she had developed toward difficult patients. Practitioners who examined her rushing through consultations, prescribed standard remedies without careful consideration, and seemed impatient with her detailed descriptions of symptoms and concerns about her ability to continue working. She found herself in the position of being a chronic patient with a complex condition, exactly the kind of case she had learned to treat with minimal attention and barely concealed annoyance. The healers she consulted treated her with professional courtesy but emotional distance, providing technically adequate care while making it clear they considered her condition more troublesome than interesting. Most painful was her visit to a renowned healer in a distant town, someone whose reputation matched what her own had once been. This healer examined Kamala with the same cursory attention she had given to patients like Priya, prescribed a standard treatment without addressing her specific concerns, and dismissed her fears about her condition's progression with the same phrases Kamala had used with her own difficult patients. These things happen as we age. You need to learn to manage your expectations. Some conditions just have to be endured. Sitting in that healer's consultation room, receiving the same cold, rushed treatment she had provided to countless others, Kamala experienced a revelation that cut through her heart like a blade. She understood that her own lack of compassion had created the very hardness she was now encountering in others. The medical community she had helped shape through her example was now treating her with the same indifference she had modeled in her own practice. The physical symptoms were devastating enough, but the emotional and spiritual consequences proved even more profound. As Kamala's condition progressed, making it impossible for her to maintain her practice, she experienced the fear, helplessness, and desperate need for compassion that all chronic patients face. She understood for the first time what it meant to be dependent on healers who might or might not provide the care needed, who might dismiss concerns or minimize suffering, who might treat symptoms without addressing the whole person's needs. In her increasing isolation and vulnerability, Kamala began remembering specific patients she had treated poorly. She recalled Priya's face during consultations where Kamala had barely looked at her, the woman's quiet acceptance of rushed care and inadequate attention. She remembered how Priya had always thanked her graciously despite receiving treatment that fell far short of what Kamala provided to more favored patients. She began to understand that Priya's gratitude had come not from satisfaction with care received, but from desperate appreciation for any help at all when facing impossible circumstances alone. The memory that haunted her most was from Priya's final visit to her practice. The woman had come during a particularly severe episode of her condition, bringing her youngest child, who was also showing signs of illness. Kamala had been busy preparing treatments for a wealthy merchant's family and had treated Priya's request for help as an unwelcome interruption. She had barely examined either the woman or the child, prescribed minimal remedies, and sent them away with clear signals that they should not return unless absolutely necessary. Now, lying in her own bed during one of her worst episodes, unable to think clearly or care for herself properly, Kamala realized that she had turned away someone who needed exactly the kind of compassionate care she herself now desperately sought. She had withheld healing presence from a suffering mother and sick child because she judged them unworthy of her full attention, and now she found herself surrounded by the same withholding hardness she had helped create. The spiritual teacher who visited Kamala during her illness was an elderly woman named Sita, who had known her family for generations. Sita had watched Kamala's transformation from compassionate young healer to successful but hardened practitioner, and she understood the deeper meaning of what was happening. The heart that closes to others' suffering closes to its own healing, Sita observed gently, sitting beside Kamala's bed where the former healer lay weak and confused. You taught your community that some people deserve less compassion than others. Now you discover what it means to be someone others consider deserving of less compassion. Kamala looked at her visitor through eyes clouded by pain and medication. I was a good healer, she said weakly. I helped many people. You were skilled, Sita agreed. But skill without compassion is like a sharp knife without a healing purpose. It can cut, but it cannot cure what matters most. Sita explained how healing communities work, how the attitude of each practitioner affects the whole system's capacity for genuine care. When healers begin sorting patients into worthy and unworthy categories, they poison the well of compassion that all healing draws from, she said. Eventually, everyone drinks from that poisoned well, including the healers themselves. Kamala understood that her own hardness had contributed to creating a medical community where genuine compassion was rare, where patients were treated as problems to be managed rather than human beings deserving of care. The very system she had helped corrupt was now treating her with the coldness she had modeled in her own practice. Can I undo this? She whispered. Can I restore what I helped destroy? The patients you treated poorly cannot return to be treated with the compassion they deserved, Sita replied softly. But understanding can grow even in the hardest soil. The question is, what you will do with this understanding if healing ever returns to your body. They sat together in the small room where Kamala now experienced the vulnerability and fear she had once dismissed in others. Two women contemplating how the compassion we withhold from others creates the very hardness that eventually breaks our own hearts when we most need healing care. This story shows us how the compassion we withhold from others creates the very hardness that eventually breaks our own hearts. Kamala discovered that when we treat some people as more deserving of care than others, we poison the well of compassion that all healing draws from, creating a system that will eventually treat us with the same coldness we showed to those we judged unworthy. Buddhism teaches that compassion is not a luxury we can afford selectively, but the foundation that makes genuine healing possible for everyone, including ourselves. When we choose hardness over tenderness, we plant seeds that grow into the very suffering we fear most, being abandoned in our greatest time of need. Rest deeply now, feeling how your own heart naturally knows the way of compassion, how it opens spontaneously when you allow it, how it connects you to all beings who share the fundamental experience of vulnerability and the need for care. Let your breathing soften your chest, your awareness expand to include all who suffer, your very sleep become an offering of peace to the world. You are held in the vast embrace of existence itself, supported by the same love that tends all beings through their struggles and triumphs. Sleep now in that recognition, trusting that tomorrow will bring new opportunities to practice the compassion that heals both giver and receiver, that connects rather than divides, that sees the sacred in every being who seeks healing care. The night is deep and quiet around us, holding space for these difficult teachings to settle into wisdom, for understanding to bloom in the fertile darkness of rest, for hearts to soften and open to the profound interconnection that makes genuine healing possible. Let yourself dissolve into that darkness like salt dissolving in water, maintaining your essential nature while becoming part of something vastly larger and more beautiful than individual existence. Sleep well, dear friend. Let these teachings work in you, like gentle rain soaking deep into earth, nourishing seeds of wisdom that will grow in their own perfect timing. You need not remember every story or analyze every lesson. Simply allow the truth to settle into your bones, into your breath, into the quiet spaces where real transformation takes root. All beings everywhere are settling into rest as you are now, connected by the shared rhythm of day becoming night, consciousness releasing into the healing darkness of sleep. You are part of this vast community of dreamers, held by the same forces that guide planets in their orbits and seasons through their endless dance. The karma these stories have revealed is not a burden to carry, but a map to freedom. Understanding how our actions shape our experience gives us the power to choose differently, to plant seeds of kindness instead of harm, to contribute healing rather than hurt to the interconnected web that holds us all. Your heart already knows this wisdom. Your deepest nature is already compassionate, already clear, already free from the illusions that create suffering. Rest in that recognition as you drift into dreams, trusting that who you truly are has never been touched by the mistakes of the past or the fears of the future. Let go completely now. Let go of trying to be someone other than who you are. Let go of the weight of your own stories, your own accumulated karma. Let go into the vast space of awareness that has always been your true home, the spaciousness that can hold all experience with perfect equanimity. The ancient ones who first told these stories around flickering fires did so not to frighten or judge, but to offer the great gift of understanding, the recognition that we are not powerless victims of circumstance, but conscious participants in creating the world we experience. This recognition is both humbling and liberating, both sobering and hopeful. In seeing clearly how harm returns to its source, we also see how love returns multiplied. In understanding how corruption spreads through systems, we glimpse how purity and kindness spread the same way. In recognizing that we cannot escape the consequences of our choices, we discover the profound importance of choosing with wisdom and compassion. You are already perfect as you are in this moment, already complete, already worthy of all the love and healing the universe has to offer. The journey of awakening is not about becoming someone better, but about recognizing the goodness that has always been your essential nature, like gold that remains precious whether polished or tarnished. Feel your body becoming lighter now, as if you could float like a feather on gentle air. Feel your mind becoming quieter, thoughts arising less frequently and with less urgency. Feel your heart becoming more spacious, expanding to hold the entire universe with tender acceptance. There is nowhere you need to travel tonight, except into the deep rest your body craves. There is nothing you need to understand, except that you are loved exactly as you are. There is no one you need to become, except more fully yourself, the aware, compassionate being who has been listening to these words with such patience and openness. The teachings will continue their work while you sleep, like medicine moving through your system, like flowers blooming in a garden tended by invisible hands. Trust this process completely. Trust that wisdom knows its own way of unfolding, that healing happens in its own timing, that awakening is as natural as sunrise after the longest night. Your breath is becoming whisper soft now, barely disturbing the peace that surrounds you. Your heartbeat is settling into the rhythm that will carry you through hours of restorative rest. Your entire being is preparing for the deep letting go that allows consciousness to dissolve back into its source, refreshed and renewed. In this final moment before sleep takes you completely, rest in the knowing that all is well. The universe is unfolding exactly as it should. Your life is meaningful and precious. Your presence makes a difference in ways you may never fully know. You are held, beloved, cherished beyond measure by the infinite intelligence that dreams all beings into existence. The stories end here, but the wisdom continues in your dreams, in your daily life, in every choice you make with greater understanding of how interconnected we all truly are. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that you carry within yourself everything needed to live with greater compassion, clearer awareness, and deeper trust in life's essential goodness. The moon moves across the sky above you. The stars wheel in their ancient patterns. The earth turns steadily toward tomorrow's dawn. You are part of this cosmic dance, this universal rhythm of rest and awakening, of sleep and renewal, of teaching and learning through countless lifetimes until all beings everywhere are free from suffering. Rest now in that vast perspective. Let your individual concerns dissolve into the larger story of consciousness awakening to itself through infinite forms. You are both the dreamer and the dreamed, both the teacher and the student, both the one who suffers and the one who heals. All boundaries are dissolving now as you sink deeper into sleep. The boundary between self and universe, between sleeping and waking, between this moment and eternity. You are returning to the source from which you emerged. The awareness that watches all experience arise and pass away like clouds in an endless sky. Thank you for this journey together through karma's difficult but liberating teachings. Thank you for your courage in facing these hard truths, your willingness to see clearly how our actions shape our world, your openness to the transformation that such seeing makes possible. May you sleep deeply and dream beautifully. May you wake refreshed and renewed, carrying forward whatever wisdom these stories have planted in the fertile ground of your consciousness. May your life be a blessing to all beings you encounter, and may all beings everywhere be happy, peaceful, and free. The silence is deepening around us now, the kind of profound quiet that holds infinite possibility. In this silence, rest. In this darkness, heal. In this letting go, find the freedom that has always been your birthright. Sleep well, dear friend. Sleep deeply and peacefully, held in the loving embrace of existence itself. Thank you for joining us at Sleepy Monk.